everyone, welcome back to another edition of the SBK Betting Podcast, endeavouring to give you some pretty good analysis, some even better tips, attempting anyway, and pleased to say that last week James and I came up with the goods with Rogue Millennium, a very popular winner of the SBK-sponsored Oaks trial. She won at 15-2, and she's throwing her hat into the ring for the Oaks itself at Epsom in a few weeks' time. We've seen some very interesting results from these Oaks and Derby trials. We'll have plenty to think about when it comes to Epsom, and we'll be previewing that. But we've got a big weekend ahead of us in that away from the Derby and Oaks trials, there is the reappearance of the unbeaten and star miler Baaeed. And that is going to be one of the main races that we're going to look at the Lockinge Stakes a little bit later, but it's a good card at Newbury, and that's where we're going to focus on. We've got Ross Millar and Tom Collins back as normal, and we're going to begin with the 135. The first race that we're going to look at is the Carnarvon Stakes, a listed race for 3-year-olds, run over 6 furlongs. I thought this was quite a good renewal of this contest, won by Creative Force last year en route to the Jersey Stakes. He was a winner of some handicaps beforehand, and it's essentially a similar sort of feel to this race. Aidan O'Brien brings over Cadamosto, but Tiber Flow for William Haggis currently heads the betting with SBK at 130. And we've got some horses that were contesting good races as 2-year-old Eras, Hierarchy, and the likes. And I thought I had a really good feel to it. TC, I'll come to you first. As I said, I found this a good race, but tricky in terms of making up my mind as to what horse is going to come out on top, because they've all coming into this with a sort of similar enough profiles. And I think there could be a bit of value around here.
Yeah, it's a difficult race. As you say, there's loads of potential superstars in here. Tiber Flow, obviously heading the market. It's only had 4 starts, all of which have come on the all-weather. So we don't know how he's going to handle the switch to turf. Eras, who's going to be my selection in the race, and I'll come to in a second, has plenty of ability, loads of potential, and could easily take a step forward from his comeback run. And there are other horses in here as well, like Ribeye, the likes of Rizk, or I presume it's pronounced Rizk, who are also in here at bigger prices that could take a big step forward and be group horses in the future. So it's a very hot heat. I am siding with Eras. Now, maybe this is a heart over head decision, but I think it's a bit of both. I love this horse. He's a big flashy chestnut, and he really caught my eye last year when he won at Ascot on his second start in a maiden. He just romped clear, pushed clear by Jim Crowley, not asked for maximum effort, but just extended away really quick 3 final furlong sectionals as well. Then on his next start, he finished last in the Aiken, the last of 5. But that Aiken was a good heat. He also returned a dirty scope, and the race wasn't run to suit. He was held up at York in a small field. You want to be on the pace at York no matter what, especially in a small field. So I can excuse him that run. Now, he had a layoff after that. He came back at Ascot, and I tipped him that day on SBK's content hub, betting.getsbk.com. And unfortunately, he only finished 3rd of 4. However, I thought he shaped with consummate amount of promise. He just moved into the race like the best horse. Now, Gobez eventually won the race under Ross Ryan. It was a great ride from the front. But he's a really tenacious 2-year-old now into a 3-year-old. He just fights away, and he just doesn't like to be beaten. I think Eras is a bit soft at this point of his career. He's not mentally all there yet, but he moved into the race like the best horse. I also love the bit of race planning by Richard Hannon. He targeted the Pavilion Stakes for Eras's first run back without a shadow of a doubt. Shadwell horses tend to follow the same mould year on year. And actually, Shadwell ran a couple of horses in this race over the last few years that have run in the Pavilion before coming here to Newbury. The likes of Ade, who actually won the Pavilion and then won this as well. And I think the fact that Eras is going to be running in this race at Newbury suggests they still think he's on an upward trajectory. He could easily make his mark in group level, and I'm hopeful that he can bounce back to winning ways.
Yeah, it could be a really big weekend for Shadwell, couldn't it? And not a huge amount of horses left in their care, but this is one of them. And I thought it was interesting that, considering he underperformed at the end of the 2-year-old career, they've definitely kept the faith in him. My question was, they've obviously ran him 4 times, twice over 7, twice over 6. Pedigree wise, he's a sprinter. It looks it, but did it look to you potentially at Ascot that he didn't look quick enough for the likes of Gobez go?
No, I think he's got plenty of speed. And I don't think it was a stamina fault over the 6 furlongs at all. Obviously, as you say, he's run over 7 a couple of times. And I think he does get the 7. We didn't get to see it in the Aiken last year. As I say, he wasn't at his best. But on his debut, when he was second to Noble Truth, he stayed out the 7 furlongs perfectly well. I think the reason they're sticking at 6 with him, despite the fact his pedigree suggests he's a sprinter, is just his ridiculously high cruising speed. Like, this horse could run over 5 furlongs. He's so quick in his races. And I think if you keep him at 6 furlongs, then you don't have to stretch his stamina. Whereas 7, he may have to travel and then quicken again. And I'm not sure he's got that kind of mental fortitude at this stage of his career.
He's 11-2, and when I looked at the prices, I thought if he's 11-2, Hierarchy is 6-1, and was ahead of Eras at Ascot. Seemingly, bit of the prices suggesting that Eras will reverse that form. But Ross, Hierarchy, in my opinion, he has been such a hardy type. He's been really reliable. Is he overpriced?
Yeah, I've got written down on my notes, tough and tenacious. He's not overly big. Eras is everything you want to see from a 2-year-old going into a 3-year-old. He's big, he's strong, he does everything right in the early part of the races. Hierarchy, I wasn't sure whether he would have perhaps trained on, because he did look small against the others last time, but he gets down, he gets dirty, he knows where the line is, and he knows how to fight. And that's the problem I have with Eras. Tom hit on it and sort of said he's perhaps not mentally strong at this point in his career. I'm just starting to worry that actually he's a bit soft in a finish, full stop. And there's no such concern with Hierarchy. Like you say, it's a very, very open race, but I just like what he did last time. And I think that's probably a decent piece of form behind Go Bears Go over 6 furlongs. I think the market's got it wrong. So I think 6-1, I'd be with him all day long against Eras at 11-2.
Yeah, he just needs to confirm that form, and it was pretty comprehensive as well. There was nearly 2 lengths between the two of them that day. By men mass, a lot of them they aren't massive horses, but they're all hard and they do train on. We've seen with a lot of May masses, some question that they can only be 2-year-olds. Interesting. Hierarchy for us at 6-1. I found this so tricky that I've actually ended up selecting the favourite. And I just wanted to chat about the favourite quickly. Ross, your thoughts on Tiber Flow, in that his unbeaten record came to an end in that all-weather Champions 3-year-old conditions race, but he didn't lose anything in defeat. And I just think he's a classic haggis type that's going through his motions. Yes, the first go on turf might be just an unknown, but he's related to some fantastic horses that are all turf horses. I think he's got Poet's Word in his family, and I can't get away from the fact that run at Newcastle last time, he didn't really do anything wrong. Maybe Tom Mock just didn't underestimated that the leader was going to stay where he was for that length of time.
Yeah, no, he lost absolutely nothing in defeat, and he probably has looked on form the best horse in this race, and probably the classiest horse in this race. I've just want to see them do it on turf before I, take on a favourite or go with a favourite in this sort of race. Like we said, it's very open. You have to say William Haggis is really starting to hit his straps north of 30%, I think, over the last 2 weeks. So yeah, it might be that we're all trying to find reasons to not go with the obvious one, but I just like to see them do it on turf, having done it on the all-weather, exclusively on the all-weather as well. So yeah, he could be a cut above these, but at the price, I'm happy to stick with a tough little Hierarchy.
Okay, well, I'm not going to go against Tiber Flow. I'm going to go with him. I thought that Garcia's performance yesterday gave me confidence that they can transfer from all weather to the turf with no problems at all. So 130, I think, is a nice price for that horse. But as said, Hierarchy for Ross and Eras for TC's big fan of that horse for the Shadwell team, who, as I said, set to have a big weekend. And we're going to look at the Rayyan Stakes, known as the Ashton Park, a Group 3 run over 1 mile and 4 furlongs, and Shadwell represented by Shada, Roger Varian, Jim Crowley, and this mare, a daughter of Muhara, is having her first run at 4. We've got Scope, who's 7-2, Fox of Tales is 92, Ilarab is 92, and Without a Fight 11-2, and the biggest of them all is Outbox, who's 10-1. Look, this is a trappy little affair, a race that, as we've seen, some fantastic sort of middle distance horses, 1 mile, 4 furlong horses really come into their own. The likes of Crystal Ocean has won this a couple of times. I thought TC maybe pinpoint that point about the trip, because there are horses who I don't believe necessarily have confirmed that they are 1 mile, 4 furlong horses. Scope looks like he needs much further than this, from suggested by the wins from last season, and he's more of a Gold Cup type. And And even Fox's Tail's not necessarily run over this trip. So for me, it was who is the genuine 1 mile 4 furlong horse in the race.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I like the fact you touched on Scope as well, because I actually think he's the most talented horse in the race. On figures, it would tell you as much. He's achieved the highest RPR with 118. You generally need an RPR of around 122 to win this race if you're above average. I don't think this heat is actually above average for the Rayyan Stakes, but still, as I say, I think Scope's the best horse in the race, talent-wise, but I don't like the trip for him. I think we'll see him to greater effect later in the season. And therefore, I'm going to take him on. When he tried this trip before, he was a bit slow and got outpaced and then stuck on. And we saw that actually throughout the last year, that he was by far his best in the final 2 furlongs over a mile 6. So definitely one to oppose. I think Ilarab's kind of the same ilk. He's got loads of stamina. He just seems to keep rolling and rolling and rolling. He doesn't have that turn of foot that you kind of need to win this race. And as you touched on, a few of the winners of this race include the likes of Crystal Ocean, Telescope. They were horses that stayed the trip well, but also had that acceleration to move clear of the bona fide stayers. The last mare to actually win this race was Howafez in 2012. So interesting that Ashada's in here, another Shadwell-owned horse. They know, as I say, they tend to fill the same mold, so they know that a mare can win this race. I just think Ashada has to improve a tiny bit, and I'd rather go with a horse who's solid, which is Fox's Tails. Now, you did mention that Fox's Tails has stamina issues. I think the 1 mile 4 will be perfect for him. He's untried really at the trip, but last year he kind of shaped as a stayer, but he has that raw speed that you kind of need, as I've already touched on, to win this race. He was very impressive throughout his 3-year-old career. Actually, he improved for every single start, apart from his final outing on Champions Day at Ascot, when he was fitted with blinkers, running in Group 1 company against better horses. And he just didn't really show what we know that Fox's Tails could show. Prior to that, he was running in the 110s, 115s, and then he performed to a mark of 96 on Champions Day. His comeback run, I think, was arguably a career best. Now, he finished second of 3 behind Mostadaf, but Mostadaf is 7-1 for the Prince of Wales at Royal Ascot and a leading player in the division. And Fox's Tails was actually held up in 3rd at Sandown, which obviously favours front runners. He moved into the race and actually hit the front with 2 furlongs to go. He just got worn down late by Mostadaf, who won very easily in the end, but he ran very creditably. And I think any improvement will see Fox's Tails win this race.
Yeah, interesting. So from your perspective, the run at Sandown shaped as if the 1 mile 4 is definitely within his keeping, essentially.
Yeah, I loved how he shaped in that race. I think all of last year, actually, as well, he shaped like a mile 4 will be perfect. But as I say, he's got that perfect mix, that ideal mix of speed and stamina. And I think that will see him come to the fore.
Yeah, interesting this horse, Fox's Tails. He's been a bit of a bridesmaid. Ross, I'll come to you next. But I was just looking back at his run in the Arc Trial at Newbury, the Legacy Cup, and he was behind Solid Stone, who's gone out and won at Chester. Ilarab, who's behind him, who's in this race again. Alazi was behind him. That form's been frank. That was a good race, and that was the only time he's run of a trip sort of nearing 1 mile 4. That was a 1 mile 3. He was only just beaten in the neck by Solid Stone. So seemingly suggests that they're confident that this is within his grasp. But is he good enough?
I think TC's right. In an ordinary year, he might perhaps be good enough. I don't think it's vintage. I think he'll certainly be Ilarab, given that they're there or thereabouts the same price. That would suggest he's a little bit of value. Galileo, Zoffany out of a Galileo mare. He looks like a stayer. I slightly disagree with TC in that I wasn't certain visually in the Gordon Richards last time, he looked like he was crying out for a step up in trip in the sort of last half furlong. But I think he did use an awful lot of petrol from 3 out to get into a challenging position and try and sort of serve it up to Mostadaf. So I think it was perhaps a slightly inefficient ride, deliberately so. So yeah, I think this trip will suit him. I think he has got a touch of class and a touch of speed, as TC touched on. Eshadar has got the penalty, and I just wonder with Roger Varian whether they've got eyes on something further down the line, and this is sort of leading her into that. So I'd be keen to take her on. And as you both said, Scope, I mean, he looks like he's a 1 3/4 mile horse all day long. So I'd be keen to take him on. So again, a trappy enough race. If anything won, you wouldn't be surprised. But I thought Fox's Tails at the price was the play, really.
Yeah, the price as it stands is 92. So confidence behind the third in the market for Fox's Tails, who's got that race fitness on his side. And I think we all agree that this is a stepping stone for Scope. I think he's a really exciting staying prospect, but that is is going to be his real aims, and the likes of the Gold Cup. I like to hope that it is a good basically pipe opener. I don't believe I have got a strong enough case for Ashada not to be winning this race, I have to admit, because when I know what you guys were putting up, I thought, right, Foxtails, I like the angle there, but Ashada she just needs to improve that a little bit. Yes, she's got a penalty, but she still gets weight off scope. The ground I thought was quite a big factor. I thought that if there's a question mark about Fox's Tail staying, with a little bit more give in the ground as well, that's just going to heighten it a little bit more. So I think she's likable. Yes, she's 7-2, but she goes really well fresh. I think that's really keen for her. She won at this track on her opening race of the season last year, and yes, there might be other targets for her, but it's not a brilliant race. And she just could be the class act. So I'm happy to take her at 7-2. I'm very conscious that I picked two favourites, though, which I don't like doing. But in the London Gold Cup Handicap, which we're going to go on to next, over 1 mile 2 furlong, this is the kind of race where you can have a lot more fun trying to sort out some horses that have slightly bigger prices. And it's a race that I really like. It's a run at 2:45, won by Baaeed last year. He's got a pre-L'Arc de Triomphe entry this week. So it just goes to show what kind of horses you can unearth in this race. Ross, I think that I can go back through loads of renewals and seen some nice horses. I think Time Test won it as well. So it's a great looking kind of race in general. And just have a quick run through the prices. Isra, 11-2 joint favourite, along with Sorry Miss and Mr. Big Stuff. And then it's a jump to 10-1 for Wineglass Bay and Red Vineyard. It kind of is a reflection on how open this race normally is, because there's usually a horse that's coming through the gears quite well and could be anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually landed on one that will almost certainly never have a pre-L'Arc de Triomphe entry. But I just think he's nicely handicapped, and is interesting that he's now finally stepping up in trip, and that's the Richard Hannon Zoom, who's perhaps been a little bit disappointing so far, but they seem to have been trying to force the pace over a mile. He tends to sort of hit a flat spot, gets a bit outpaced, and then sort of sticks on quite nicely at the back end of it. From a family that's got stacks of stamina, despite them all being by stallions that wouldn't necessarily cry out stamina. So he's a half to Quick, who's won over 1 mile and 4. He was an Olympic glory. And then the other half is Retribution, who won a 2 mile 3 furlong maiden hurdle for Gordon Elliott by Ifraj. It just suggests that the mare puts stacks of stamina in. I think he's not really been ridden to best effect trying to force be up with the pace and force it over 1 mile. I think it'd be interesting to see him dropped in a little bit, ridden with a bit more of a race in mind over this extended trip. And he's very, very nicely handicapped, I think. I think he's certainly shown glimpses of ability. And if this extra couple of furlongs unlocks that, I think he's a really nice each way play at a big price.
He's 16-1, so that's definitely one of the bigger prices. I think it's a key point. A lot of these horses, 2 to 3, this will be their first go over 1 mile 2 furlongs. There aren't many options for horses at this stage. It's probably one of their first opportunities. Yeah, he's definitely nicely handicapped at mark of 78. So 8-8 on board. Thorhammer Hansen on board. TC, your thoughts with this? Because there's definitely a few nicely handicapped sorts who come here with good weights.
Yeah, this is one of my favourite races on the calendar, actually. I love the London Gold Cup. It always seems to produce multiple 3-year-olds that are going to go on to much bigger and better things. Baaeed, who you mentioned earlier, is one of my favourite horses in training. Massive fan of him, and I really hope he does well this season for Michael Stout. I don't think this year's renewal is the best, I have to say. There are obviously horses in here that are very well handicapped, and probably a fair amount of them. But I don't think there's 2 or 3 horses that are going to make their market group level. I think there's potentially one, and that's maybe a stretch at this point. And that's Isra, but I don't think he's all there yet. I think he's very much like Eraz that we covered earlier, but he's a longer distance type who probably needs even longer to develop. And therefore, I want to be taking him on. The horse that Ross has covered, Zoom, I think is very well handicapped, I have to say. I tipped him last time at Goodwood. He disappointed in 4th, but I think he's well treated, and he'll probably make his mark in a weaker race, I imagine. A couple of others I think you want to put in your tracker ahead of the race. A Marsoul, who you might come to in a minute, I believe, Jess, and the others, Inverness. I think they're both well handicapped too. But the horse I actually landed on is one called Surrey Mist. I think he's kind of a here and now horse rather than the likes of Zoom and Marsoul, who will progress up the handicaps, in my opinion. Sorry Miss has matured loads this year. He's only had 3 starts, so babyish on his debut last year, but he ran in a good race won by Zechariah, who has already proved himself to be listed level. And then he made a winning reappearance at Lingfield in a terrible race, I have to say, but he did it nicely. He beat a horse trained by Andrew Baldwin, who's won since, called After 8. And then last time out at Kempton, I thought we saw a completely different horse. He raced prominently rather than in behind the speed. He was professional throughout. He quickened nicely. Yes, that was over a furlong further, and 1 mile 2 may be the shortest he wants to go. I think he's probably in a 1.5 mile horse. But I loved how he went through that race in quick and clear. Just struck me as a horse that is likely to make his mark at a higher level, as I say. And I reckon if he was trained by anyone other than George Baker, if he was John Gosden or William Haggis, I reckon he'd be a clear-cut favourite in here. So sorry, miss for me.
Be by Kendargent, he could be a jumper in the making. And George Baker, as you say, probably underestimated. And I thought that Seman, that is clearly well handicapped, who won very well at Newmarket. That's just another type that he's just done really well with. It's sort of taken everyone by surprise. I wasn't entirely sure how much he's necessarily beaten for a race like this, but a mark of 85, that looked quite a nice enough opening mark for him.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. As you say, he hasn't beaten much. That Lingfield race on his comeback was terrible. Last time out at Kempton was slightly better in that novice event where he gave away a penalty. But I've said this before, but I think too much is sometimes made of what a horse has beaten. If they're visually impressive and win decisively, they can only do that much in a weak race. And I think Sorry Missed, although he does have to prove his quality, I think he's going to prove his quality.
Yeah, well, the market seems to agree anyway at present. It's been priced up at 11-2 sort of opening. So it'll be interesting to see how much that changes from now until Saturday. We'll touch on Marsoul then, because this is a horse that I was really impressed with when he won at 25-1 at Nottingham and came out of nowhere, beating a nice horse in New Dimension. He'd done very little in his 2 starts before. He's ran 3 times in April. So they clearly think that he was coming out of races not having raced enough or much at all to have shown that what he's made of. An opening mark of 84 looks nice to me, but the big thing about him is that I think he needed every inch of the trip that he had at Nottingham. So this extra furlong and a half should suit him, and he's a winner. He's got his head in front now, and he's clearly doing better for racing. So why have you not selected him, TC?
Yeah, I thought he ran very well last time, as you covered. Ross Aran, I like the booking as well. Richard Hannon tends to bring his horses along nicely. I think he'll run very takingly. I'm just not convinced he has the quality to win a London Gold Cup at this stage. I think he's well handicapped. I think he'll run well. But if he can beat the likes of Sorry Miss, just getting £1 off that runner, Isra as well, who obviously is carrying 80, is running off a mark of 89, but is carrying a little bit more weight. I think it'll be a bit of a shock if Marsoul could beat those at this stage. But if he does win, I'll be celebrating for you.
Okay, well, he's 12-1, so I thought that was a nice price for a race where there could be anything in here. Isra is out of the Great Tagruda, Ross, and as TC was saying, bred to be a lot better than the mark of 89 that he's got. He didn't love the dip at Newmarket. He changed his legs a lot, and it's important with horses at this stage in their career because they're always learning, and he is a horse that could be, of all of them, as TC was saying, the one that will develop into a much better horse than some of these could be, just relatively good handicappers.
Yeah, I think Connections and Punter have a much greater understanding of his ability after he's run at Newbury. That's perhaps not all that helpful if you're looking to have a bet on him before, but a nice flat track like Newbury, there is no other variable other than their ability and, okay, a bit of luck in running. But yeah, a lot cannot handle Newmarket. Like Sir Beverley and tracks like that, you do sometimes have to just be a bit patient, see what he shows with a fair track and a fair run, and I think we'll know an awful lot more about him. But he is, if you went through the pedigrees, he's by some way the standout.
Yeah, he definitely is, and hence why he's a market leader. But Zoom for Ross. For myself, I've said Marsoul, we've had this. We'll myself and TC will beg to differ with him. Sorry, Miss 11-2 for TC. And the other horse I'm going to throw in there, because we've talked about Zoom's form, and just ahead of Zoom was Winglass Bay at Goodwood that time. I think that he is a horse that will benefit from the step up and trip. He's definitely well thought of by James Ferguson. He was actually put up £2 for that run at Goodwood, where I think he probably he was entitled just to have needed it. So he's rated 85 by Newbury, the sire of Bay Bridge, who's just, I think they do better and better for time, and also maybe this trip out of an Arch Penca mare. Really like his breeding, and he could be a bit more value as well at 10-1. So those two for me, and that's the London Gold Cup handicap, which is definitely the best betting rate on the day. We're going to go now to the Lockinge, which it won't be the best betting rate of the day, but it is interesting, probably because we do have a nice enough field size to find a horse or two that at an each way price, I would say for all of us, there's 9 runners, and obviously the standout horse, and the horse that I'm not surprised is 1 to 2 is Baaeed for William Haggas and Jim Crowley. Unbeaten coming into his 4-year-old career. Could be the next, I don't even want to say it, because obviously we love to see brilliant horses, and he's done everything right so far. He could be one of a star in the making, and he's shown himself that he is already, Ross. We want him to win, don't we? Or do you think that this, after reading what I've read throughout the week, or do you think this could be the moment, if there could be any, for him to be beaten?
We want him to win, and I'd argue perhaps the flat season needs him to win. We do need these superstars to sort of grab the attention of the public, and plenty's been written this week about the sort of interest waning. I think he is potentially a superstar, but I do agree that if he's going to get beaten, perhaps first time out over a mile, I see that they might look to step him up throughout the season, certainly to a mile 2. I'm sure he'll be ready, and as we just talked about, the yard are in fine form. But if he is beatable, it's probably first time out over this trip. But I don't foresee it. But I think if all three of us sat here and said Baaeed wins, it would be a fairly dull podcast. So to try and find some opposition against him, and one that I thought was overpriced, is Real World. Now, his last 2 lines of form are abysmal, but that was on the dirt, so I think just put a line through that. His last run in Europe, he beat the Revenant in a Group 2 at Longchamp, and did it nicely. He stays a little bit further than the mile, we know that, so I think they can be quite positive with him. He had a very, very progressive season last year, and I just felt that with all the talk about Baaeed, he perhaps gone a little bit under the radar, and I was surprised to see him as big as he is, because I do think he'll be the one to chase Baaeed home. So I thought he was a smart horse and shouldn't be forgotten about, because they'll have aspirations of their own to push forward in Europe with him this year.
You never hear a huge amount from the William Haggas team. I've always they're kind of a mysterious yard, because they kind of they plan out their horses so well and so brilliantly. But I always thought maybe, is he a touch fragile? They're very careful with him, but maybe it's also because they have been nervous about unleashing him, and they don't really know the limits of his potential. But I think really at the end of last season, we really saw what that was. And to me, he's unbeatable.
Yeah, he's a very good horse, isn't he? There's a lot on the line with a horse like Baaeed. Obviously rated 125, one of the leading horses in the world, according to the Longines rankings. 6 from 6. He's still a colt, so is going to probably make into a brilliant stallion. There's a lot on the line. They campaigned him very well last year. They brought him through the stages gently. His first Group 1 success came in France against weaker fields. I mean, he beat Order of Australia that day, who, aside from the Breeders' Cup victory, has been pretty disappointing throughout his career. And then at Ascot, that was his real test, wasn't it? That was, do we see Baaeed as the new star in the division in UK horse racing? And the answer was yes. He beat Palace Pier, who was the original miler, champion miler in the QE2. There is a lot on the line, but I think because of that, he's going to be pretty fit and ready to go. They don't want this horse to be beaten. It loses a little bit of value if he loses this race. So they want Baaeed to win and maintain his unbeaten record, 7 from 7. And I think he will. Like last year in this race, we saw Palace Pier go off a 1-2 favourite against a similar kind of field, and he won. He didn't win that convincingly. It was only a length and a half over Lady Bowthorpe, but he still won pretty takingly, as you'd expect a short price favourite to win. I think it could be the same situation this year. The market's very similar as well. Last year, Lope Fernandez, Fraden O'Brien was second favourite, clear second favourite around 11-2. And this year, Mother Earth is the clear second favourite at 6-1. So it's got a very similar makeup. I, like both of you, think Baaeed will win. Alcohol Free, I think, will run a lot better. She was disappointed on her comeback, but she was a notable drifter in the market. She had a hood on, which I don't think helped because the hood's now been dispensed with. I think she's going to run a lot better today. On Saturday, not today. And she'll probably hit the frame. She isn't my each way selection though, because I think she's a relatively shortish price at 16-1, given how she performed on her comeback. And the actual selection each way is going to be the lovable Sabuska. Now, he's a massive price and he's not good enough to win this race. There is no way he'll win this race. If he does, that'll be clipped onto Twitter and people will be mocking me. But he has been campaigned in Group 1s throughout his career. He finished third in a Queen Anne last year behind Palace Pier, only beaten 2 lengths. On his comeback run, he was, not his comeback run, his most recent start, he wasn't suited by the way the race panned out. It was a small field. He raced right near the speed next to a Godolphin-owned runner, which you don't really want for Sabuska. He's a horse that travels well in behind the pace, moves through and then picks up the pieces. I think he can do that in this race. Holly Dill takes the ride. This has kind of been the plan, although he's just going to be pitched in at these races throughout the season. Hopefully he can take third. As others falter, he'll be staying on.
Yeah, he's such a likable horse. He always runs his race. He really enjoys himself at Ascot, but I thought the run, especially in Meydan behind Lord North, where he was 5th, was just incredible for a horse of this nature. He's just been an absolute star. And as you say, he's a price of the year is 50-1 because he won't be winning a race like this. But that's good value each way. I do agree with you. In a race where we all agree that Baaeed should win this, and we hope he wins it. Myself, I don't think that New Mandate's a bad price at 20-1. It was ahead of Sabuska at Ascot. I think he surprised Rafe Beckett, as he mentioned how sick he was after the Jersey Stakes last year. He was in a field for 2 months. So to come back after that long layoff and win what was a bit of a Mickey Mouse race, that it wasn't over exciting, the race, but I just think that he can come on from that. He's 20-1 to potentially come second or third to Baaeed. That's all right for me. It's really interesting how you've analysed that compared to this time last year, a race of a similar nature with Palace Pier, and he essentially proved unbeatable until Baaeed came along. So we hope that form continues on. We'll look forward to watching the Lockinge Stakes at 3:20 at Newbury on Saturday. But that is the end of our big analyses of all the races from the weekend. We've got to look at our naps and next best, which can come from anywhere. And there's a lot of racing on Saturday and some good quality action up and down the country and over the jumps. And I'd love to think that Ross is going to keep all your jump enthusiasm rolling for another weekend. So start off with Ross.
The SBK Betting Podcast for all your racing needs.
Yeah.
Indeed, I have gone to the jumps. The nap comes in the 6:20 from Utoxeter, the Paul Nicholls trained Eglantine de Soy. She is a summer horse. She loves good ground. Angus Cheetah takes a valuable £5 off. She's off a mark of 142. She was beaten last time by Panic Attack, who I think is just a quicker horse. She didn't stop over the 2 mile 4, steps back up to near 3 miles. I think she'll go well in that. And then for my next best, I'm going to take a bit of a flyer and throw 2 into the mix. The next best selection is Grand Knight of Sean Currans. I followed him closely. He won a Larkhill maiden point to point. You have to be pretty decent to win a Larkhill maiden, and he won it very easily. The horse back in 6th, beaten about 11 lengths, Barrowmount, is now rated 118. Grand Knight starts off his hurdling handicap campaign off a mark of just 83. I think he's been well produced to get that mark. Steps up in trip a little bit. I think he'll go well. And then the same owner, and it's an owner who does like to land a little bit of a gamble, has in the 750 Utoxeter Charlotte, different trainer, Gary Brown. He's down £9 for being beaten on his handicap debut, where he didn't look to stay 2 mile 3, drops back to 2 miles. So put those two together, maybe in a little double, or maybe wait and see how Grand Knight goes. And if he goes in, perhaps go again on Charlotte. They'd be my naps and next bests.
Brilliant. We don't mind that. As you said, there's plenty of racing, so keeps us entertained throughout the day. So thanks for that from Ross. And TC, where are you going with your nap and next best?
Yeah, I'm going to stick to Newbury, the best flat action on Saturday. The nap is going to be a horse called Persian Force in the 355 at Newbury, which is a conditions event. Only 4 runners, but there's an Aidan O'Brien newcomer in there, Richard Hanna newcomer, and an Andrew Balding trained juvenile who won first time up, as well as Persian Force. So it's quite a hot little race. I just love this horse. I've said that 3 times on this podcast, but 3 different horses I love: Eraz, Baybridge, and now Persian Force. I was fortunate enough to be up at Doncaster for SBK Lincoln Day. And Persian Force just ran away with the Brocklesby. He looked a completely different type to what you usually see in that kind of race. You'd normally look for the precocious sorts, the nippy, small, mentally mature horses at 2 years old early in the season. But he was none of it. He relaxed in the paddock, big horse, and he just moved through the race like a real classy conveyance. Spoke to Rosser after the race, and I asked him, is he one of the sharpest horses in the Hannon Yard? And he went, no, not at all. I was like, what? Why are you running the Brocklesby? He said, let's give him a break and then we'll see what he's going to be like for the rest of the season. They've given him a break, 49 days. He comes back in this conditions event. I think he's a group horse in the making, and he's my nap, Persian Force, in the 355. And the next best is Eraz. We've already touched on him in the Carnarvon Stakes, the 135 at Newbury. Look, I could have put a couple of horses up for the next best. It was basically out of the races we've covered at Newbury. But Eraz is just a horse I think can progress to the next level. I think he's better than his comeback run, and he's a reasonable price to do so as well. So Eraz the next best, Persian Force the nap.
Got really exciting a weekend when 2 of your favourite horses in training are running at the same time. So imagine there'll be a couple of doubles going on. I just say Persian Force, really, really exciting performance in the Brocklesby. And you'd imagine if he takes this, he'll be en route to Royal Ascot. Indian Renegade, just quickly note, is a horse that I selected as one of the 2-year-old to follow in the SBK flat season guide. He's out of Jewel in the Sand, Royal Ascot winner, and by the first season star Sioux Nation. So interesting to see that are pitching that against Persian Force for the same owners as well. So yeah, that's a really interesting 2-year-old race on Saturday at Newbury. For me, my nap, I'm going to go with Zane Surinder in the 150 at Newmarket. It's a listed race for 3-year-olds. I really, really like this horse for Tom Clover, who's going great guns. Obviously won the SBK Oaks trial last week. I think that he really was unsuited to Epsom in the Derby trial there, where he was third to Nahani. He was just a little bit all over the place. He was lugging left, and I think he'll be seen to better effect at Newmarket. He's got good form behind him from the winter on the all-weather, and he's looked pretty impressive. And I think that he can, as I say, just see to better effect. And yes, I think he's quite a nice price as well, as it stands. Zane Surinder is 72. And then my next best will go with Tiber Flow in I think which time was it? The 135 at Newbury that we've covered earlier on for William Haggis going great guns. And I think this could just be the class act in the race. So we've gone through our naps and next best. Don't forget, we've got an offer for new customers. Deposit £10, get £30 in free bets. Terms and conditions always apply. Hopefully we've got enough for you all to look forward to at Newbury and throughout the rest of the country on Saturday. Make sure to like, subscribe. We'll be back next week with more racing previews in action. Hopefully we'll be able to revisit some of the racing from this weekend as well. So thanks to TC and to Ross, and we'll see you soon.